The Seoul Arts Center auditorium falls silent as my name echoes through the sound system. Maya Johnson, Best New Actress. 2,000 pairs of eyes turn toward me. Cameras flash like lightning, and I feel my hands trembling against the golden envelope in my lap. The contract that could either cement my place in Korean cinema or destroy everything I've built. 6 months ago, I was nobody. A graduate student buried in diplomatic theory textbooks, planning a safe career in international relations. Tonight, I'm seated in the front row between Korea's biggest stars, wearing a custom hanbok-inspired gown that cost more than my semester tuition, about to make a decision that will either validate every risk I've taken or confirm my family's worst fears about throwing away my real future. The presenter, veteran actress Kim Hee-jin, smiles at me from the stage. Maya C., would you like to come up and say a few words? But it's not just any acceptance speech they're expecting. Hidden inside this envelope is Chairwoman Park's final ultimatum, a new contract that would make me the face of her entertainment empire, but with one devastating clause. I must publicly denounce my amateur background and claim that my success comes from intensive training, not natural talent. Essentially, I must lie about who I am to keep what I've become. Min Jae-wook, sitting 2 seats to my left, catches my eye. The same man who discovered me fumbling in the rain outside a Hongdae cafe, who believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself. His subtle nod says everything. Whatever you choose, I'm with you. My phone buzzes with a text from my mother in Chicago. We're watching live. Make us proud, baby girl. She doesn't know about the contract. She doesn't know that accepting this award means choosing between the daughter they raised and the woman I've become. I stand up, my legs shaking beneath the silk fabric, and begin walking toward that stage. Each step echoes through the auditorium like a heartbeat. The envelope crinkles in my sweaty palm. In 30 seconds, I'll reach that microphone, and whatever I say next will either destroy the glass ceiling I've been hammering against or prove that some barriers are meant to remain unbroken. The spotlight blinds me as I climb the stairs, but I can feel the weight of a nation's expectations pressing down on my shoulders. What happens when a dream you never knew you had collides with the reality you thought you wanted? Sometimes the answer changes everything. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to stand in that spotlight, everything changes you. If you want to know whether I chose authenticity over acceptance, or discover how a diplomatic briefcase led me to this moment, follow my journey from the very beginning. 3 weeks before my world exploded, I stood in Professor Lee's international relations classroom, clutching my meticulously prepared presentation on soft power dynamics in contemporary East Asian cinema. My Louis Vuitton briefcase, a graduation gift from parents who'd saved for months, sat beside the podium like a symbol of everything I was supposed to become. Miss Johnson, Professor Lee's kind eyes encouraged me as 25 Korean classmates turned their attention toward the only black face in the room. Please begin when ready. I'd researched for weeks, analyzing how Korean films projected national identity internationally. I understood the theory perfectly. What I didn't understand was why my voice started shaking the moment I opened my mouth. Korean cinema has successfully utilized Hallyu to expand cultural influence beyond traditional boundaries. I began, reading directly from my notes because making eye contact felt impossible. The strategic deployment of cultural products creates soft power advantages that complement economic expansion initiatives. The words felt hollow, academic, disconnected from the vibrant films I'd actually watched late at night in my tiny Hongdae apartment, movies that made me laugh and cry and feel things I couldn't articulate in diplomatic jargon. Professor Lee frowned slightly. Miss Johnson, you seem to be reciting rather than analyzing. What's your personal perspective on this phenomenon? Personal perspective? I'd spent 2 years training myself to suppress personal perspectives in favor of objective analysis. Well, from a theoretical standpoint, the measured deployment of Maya. His interruption was gentle but firm. You've lived here for 2 years. You've experienced Hallyu firsthand. What do you actually think? The classroom felt suffocating. 25 faces stared at me, waiting for insight I couldn't seem to access. My prepared talking points scattered like leaves in wind. I stopped, my throat tight. I think I don't understand this culture well enough to analyze it properly. The admission hung in the air like a confession of failure. Professor Lee's expression softened with something that looked dangerously close to pity. Perhaps that's where your analysis should begin, he said quietly. Sometimes the most valuable diplomatic insight comes from acknowledging what we don't yet understand. I nodded and returned to my seat, my cheeks burning. Sarah Kim, my only real friend in the program, squeezed my shoulder sympathetically, but I could feel the judgment radiating from other students. The American girl who talked big about cultural analysis, but couldn't even present confidently. As class ended, I shoved my notes into my briefcase with unnecessary force. 2 years of graduate study, and I was still performing rather than participating, observing rather than connecting. Maya, wait a moment, Professor Lee called as students filed out. I approached his desk reluctantly, preparing for the gentle critique that would confirm my deepest insecurities about not belonging here. Your research was thorough, he began. But you're holding yourself at a distance from the subject matter. You analyze Korean culture like it's something happening to other people when you're living it every day. I'm trying to maintain academic objectivity. Objectivity is valuable, but so is authentic engagement. You can't understand soft power without feeling its effects on yourself. He smiled. Maybe it's time to stop being such a careful observer and start being a participant. Walking home that evening, his words echoed in my mind. The October air carried the scent of roasted chestnuts from street vendors, and the neon signs reflected off wet pavement like liquid light. For the first time in months, I looked around me, really looked, instead of hurrying toward my next academic obligation. Seoul was beautiful, chaotic and overwhelming and beautiful. And I'd been living here like a tourist with a research agenda. Maybe Professor Lee was right. Maybe I'd been so focused on maintaining professional distance that I'd forgotten how to feel anything authentic about this place I'd chosen to call home. But I had no idea that tomorrow night, everything I thought I knew about myself would shatter in the most unexpected way possible. The Yonsei University Library closed at 11 p.m., and I'd stayed until the very last minute, desperately trying to salvage my wounded academic pride with extra research. My briefcase felt heavier than usual as I walked down Sinchon Row, rain beginning to fall in the way Seoul rain always did, suddenly and thoroughly. 3 essays on East Asian economic policy awaited me at home, along with the familiar anxiety that I was falling behind, failing to prove myself worthy of the scholarship that brought me here. My parents had sacrificed so much to support my dream of becoming a diplomat, and all I could show for it was a growing collection of mediocre presentations, and the nagging feeling that I was playing a role I'd never learned properly. The fine October rain transformed Seoul into a watercolor painting, blurring the harsh edges of concrete and neon into something almost magical. I pulled my coat tighter and quickened my pace, my mind still cycling through soft power theories and diplomatic frameworks, when a familiar voice caught my attention from inside a 24-hour cafe. No, it's not working. I need something authentic. I slowed, recognizing the voice but unable to place it immediately. Through the rain-streaked window of Café Bene, I saw a small group huddled around laptops and scattered papers. their body language radiating frustration and exhaustion. "We've tried 15 actresses," the voice continued. And that's when I realized who was speaking. Min Jae-wook. The Min Jae-wook, whose face smiled from subway advertisements and whose songs played in every convenience store across the city. None of them can convey this vulnerability we need. They're all performing vulnerable instead of actually being vulnerable. A woman in an expensive suit, clearly a producer, gestured helplessly at a stack of headshots. "Jae-wook, we start filming in 3 weeks. We need to cast someone." "Then find me someone real," he said, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. "Find me someone who doesn't know they're being watched." I stood there, mesmerized by this glimpse behind the curtain of an industry I'd only observed from the outside. The director looked exhausted, Jae-wook looked frustrated, and the producer looked like she was calculating how much money they were losing with each passing minute. That's when I tripped. The wet metal trash can made contact with my shin, and the sound, clang, echoed through the quiet street like a gong. My briefcase flew open, spilling academic papers across the wet pavement, and I went down hard on one knee, my glasses fogging up instantly in the sudden humidity. Every head in the cafe turned toward the window. Every single one. I scrambled to collect my soaked papers, my cheeks burning with embarrassment as I tried to stuff international relations theory back into my briefcase. Through the cafe window, I could see them all staring at this clumsy foreign girl who'd just provided unexpected street theater for their late-night work session. But when I looked up through my fogged glasses, Jae-wook was the only one still watching me. His eyes were wide, like he'd seen something significant in my moment of complete gracelessness. Before I could flee in shame, he rushed outside. "Wait!" His voice carried the same intensity I'd heard through the window, but now it was directed at me. "Please wait!" I stopped, clutching my damp briefcase against my chest, my kinky hair probably a disaster from the rain, my professional facade completely destroyed. "You," he said, slightly breathless from his sprint to the sidewalk, "have exactly the expression we're looking for." "I'm sorry?" My English slipped out automatically, confusion overriding my carefully practiced Korean. That look just now, surprised, vulnerable, completely unguarded. "Have you ever acted?" I stared at him, wondering if this was some kind of elaborate prank. "Acting? I'm studying international relations." His smile was radiant. "Even better. You're real." "I don't understand." "We're casting for a film. A drama about a young woman navigating an unexpected life change. Every actress we've seen is beautiful and talented and completely wrong for the role because they're trying so hard to be perfect." He gestured toward the cafe, where the producer and director were now pressed against the window, watching our conversation with obvious interest. "But you just lived the exact emotion we need to capture." The rain was falling harder now, and I felt like Alice tumbling down a rabbit hole. "You want me to audition for a movie? I want you to consider it. What's your name?" "Maya Johnson." "Maya, I know who you are," I interrupted, then immediately wondered if that sounded too fangirl. "I mean, everyone knows who you are." "Then you know I don't make casual offers. There's something authentic about you that trained actresses lose after years in the industry." He pulled out his phone. "Can I get your number? Just to talk about the possibility?" I gave him my number because what else do you do when a K-pop star asks for it after you've fallen spectacularly in front of his work meeting? As he typed it in, the producer appeared at his shoulder. "Jae-wook, what are you doing?" "Finding our lead actress," he said, not taking his eyes off me. Standing there on that wet Seoul sidewalk, my academic papers probably dissolving in my briefcase, I had no idea that I just stumbled into a completely different future. But sometimes the universe has to knock you down before it can show you where you're supposed to land. I didn't sleep that night. Back in my cramped studio apartment, I laid my damp academic papers out to dry like laundry, trying to salvage weeks of research while my mind replayed every moment of that surreal encounter. Min Jae-wook's business card sat on my tiny kitchen table like evidence of a fever dream. By morning, I'd convinced myself it hadn't really happened. International relations students don't get discovered by K-pop stars outside coffee shops. That's the plot of a drama, not real life. But at 8 a.m., my phone rang with an unknown number. Maya C? This is Park Min-jung, Min Jae-wook's manager. He'd like to invite you for coffee this afternoon to discuss the project we mentioned. My Korean faltered. I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. I'm not an actress. That's precisely why we're interested, she replied smoothly. Are you available at 2 p.m.? 3 hours later, I found myself in a private room at a Gangnam cafe that probably cost more per coffee than I spent on food in a week. My diplomatic briefcase sat beside me like a shield, filled with emergency conversation topics about international relations, in case this whole thing was a misunderstanding. Jae-wook arrived exactly on time, wearing a simple black sweater and jeans, looking more like a college student than a celebrity. The producer from last night, introduced as Mrs. Choi, carried a leather portfolio that I assumed contained contracts or legal documents that would prove I didn't belong here. Thank you for coming, Jae-wook said, settling across from me. I hope we didn't completely derail your academic schedule. Actually, you might have saved it, I admitted. Yesterday's presentation was a disaster. What happened? I realized I've been studying Korean culture like a specimen in a lab instead of actually experiencing it. The honesty surprised me. I never admitted professional failures to strangers. Mrs. Choi leaned forward with interest. And how did that feel? Terrifying. Like I'd wasted 2 years pretending to understand something I'd never really engaged with. Perfect, Jae-wook said, smiling. That's exactly the emotional journey our character needs to take. He slid a script across the table. The title read, Between Worlds, a story about a young woman caught between her planned future and an unexpected opportunity that challenges everything she thought she wanted. This character, Mrs. Choi explained, is someone who's always followed the expected path until life forces her to question whether that path is actually hers. I flipped through the pages, recognizing my own internal monologue reflected in the dialogue. This is very specific. Good stories usually are, Jae-wook said. We've been struggling to find an actress who can convey this internal conflict authentically. Most performers we've seen approach it as an acting exercise rather than a lived experience. But I don't have any training. You have something more valuable. You understand what it feels like to question your own choices in real time. Mrs. Choi opened her portfolio and pulled out a filming schedule. We'd like you to do a screen test, just a few scenes, nothing elaborate. If it works, we'll discuss next steps. I stared at the schedule, my practical mind calculating all the academic commitments I'd have to rearrange. My scholarship required maintaining certain grade levels. My parents expected regular updates on my diplomatic progress. My entire identity was built around becoming someone serious and professional and academically successful. I don't know, I said finally. This seems like a very expensive way to prove I'm not actress material. Maya. Jae-wook's voice was gentle, but intense. Yesterday when you fell, when your paper scattered, when you looked up through those fogged glasses, that moment was more honest than anything I've seen in 15 auditions. You can't fake that kind of authenticity. What if I can't do it again on camera? Then we'll know. But what if you can? I closed the script, my hands shaking slightly. Can I think about it overnight? Of course. But Maya? Mrs. Choi smiled. Sometimes the most important decisions are the ones that scare us most. Walking back to campus, I clutched the script against my chest like it contained state secrets. Sarah found me in the library an hour later, staring blankly at my economic development textbook. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, dropping into the chair beside me. "Worse. I think I've seen a possible future I never planned for. Want to talk about it?" I told her everything. The cafe, the meeting, the script that felt like someone had been reading my diary. Sarah listened with growing amazement and increasing concern. "Maya, this is insane. You can't just abandon your degree for some random acting opportunity." "It's not random. It's Min Jae-wook." "Exactly. Which means it's probably a publicity stunt or a reality show or something designed to make you look foolish." Her words hit exactly where my own fears lived. But when I opened the script again that night, reading the character's internal monologue about feeling caught between two worlds, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't about acting at all. Maybe it was about finally learning how to be authentic instead of academic. But agreeing to try meant risking everything I'd worked toward, and I had no idea if I was brave enough to take that leap. The screen test was scheduled for Saturday morning at a small production studio in Mapogu. I spent Friday night reading the scenes over and over, trying to memorize lines while simultaneously convincing myself this was an elaborate joke that would end with hidden cameras and viral embarrassment. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked terrified. I'd chosen conservative business attire, navy blazer, pressed slacks, minimal makeup, like I was heading to a diplomatic interview rather than whatever this was supposed to be. The production studio was smaller than I'd expected, tucked between a nori bang and a fried chicken restaurant. Inside, the space buzzed with professional equipment and crew members who moved with the casual efficiency of people who'd done this 1,000 times. Jae-wook greeted me with coffee, and what I was learning to recognize as his signature encouraging smile. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm about to humiliate myself in front of expensive cameras." "Perfect. Nervous energy often translates beautifully on screen." The director, Kim Sung-ho, was younger than I'd expected, with kind eyes behind thick-framed glasses. He explained the setup. Just 3 short scenes, handheld camera for naturalism, minimal crew to reduce pressure. "We want to see who you are when you think no one important is watching," he said. "Don't perform for us. Just exist in the character's world." The first scene was simple. The character receives a phone call that changes everything. I sat at a cafe table, script pages scattered around me, my actual briefcase serving as a prop because it looked more authentic than anything from their prop department. Action. The phone rang. I answered with the character's name, and suddenly I wasn't Maya, the nervous graduate student, anymore. I was someone else. Someone whose carefully planned life was about to shatter in the most unexpected way. "What do you mean the program is canceled?" The words came out with genuine panic, because I was channeling my own fear of academic failure. But I've already committed everything to this path. The conversation continued, and I found myself forgetting about the camera entirely. This character's devastation felt like every anxiety I'd carried for 2 years. The fear of disappointing parents, of wasting opportunities, of discovering you've been pursuing the wrong dream. "Cut," Director Kim called softly. "Maya, that was..." He paused, looking at the camera operator, who nodded with obvious satisfaction. "Different," Jae-wook finished. "Completely different from what we've been seeing." The second scene was more complex. A confrontation with a family member who doesn't understand the character's choices. Mrs. Choi read the opposing role, and I found myself accessing frustration I hadn't known I was carrying. "You think I'm being impulsive," I said, the character's words channeling my own defensive feelings about studying abroad, about choosing Korea over safe domestic options. "But maybe for once in my life, I'm being honest about what I actually want instead of what I think I should want." The emotional truth of it caught me off guard. My voice cracked slightly, and I felt tears threatening. "Don't stop," Director Kim murmured from behind the camera. "Keep going." "I know you invested in my future," I continued, thinking about my own parents' sacrifices. "But what if the future you invested in isn't the one I'm supposed to live?" When Director Kim called cut, the studio was completely quiet. The third scene was just me, alone, making a decision. No dialogue, just internal reaction. I sat with the script, letting the character's uncertainty wash over my face, trying not to think about how this moment paralleled my own impossible choice between academic safety and artistic risk. And cut. The crew began breaking down equipment, and I sat there feeling emotionally drained and weirdly exhilarated. Acting, it turned out, was like the world's most intense therapy session performed in front of strangers. "How do you feel?" Jae-wook asked, settling beside me. "Like I just told secrets I didn't know I was keeping." Director Kim approached with the camera operator, both wearing expressions I couldn't read. "Maya, we need to ask you something honestly," Director Kim said. "Have you really never acted before?" "Never." "Why?" "Because what you just did." He looked at his crew. "That wasn't acting. That was just truth. Raw and completely unfiltered." Mrs. Choi appeared with a new script, thicker than the screen test scenes. "We'd like to offer you the lead role," she said simply. I stared at the script like it was a bomb. "The lead role? Filming begins in 6 weeks. It's a significant commitment. 3 months of shooting, promotional obligations, press appearances." Her tone was businesslike, but I could see excitement in her eyes. "Think carefully, Maya. This will change your life completely." Walking home that afternoon, I carried 2 scripts, the original test scenes and the full screenplay that could rewrite my entire future. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "How are your studies going, baby? Dad's been bragging to everyone about his future diplomat daughter." I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "Everything's going really well, Mom. I'll call you tomorrow." But I had no idea how to explain that their future diplomat daughter might be about to become someone they'd never planned for. The question was, did I have the courage to become her? I had planned to spend the weekend agonizing over the decision in private, weighing diplomatic security against artistic uncertainty until I drove myself insane with analysis. Instead, I woke up Sunday morning to 17 missed calls and a text from Sarah that made my blood freeze. "Maya, check Naver News. Now." My hands shook as I opened the browser on my phone. The top entertainment story featured a grainy photo of me walking into the production studio, my briefcase clearly visible, looking nervous and completely out of place among the industry professionals. The headline read, "Min Jae-wook's mystery casting. Foreign student spotted at secret audition." The article was surprisingly detailed for something allegedly secret. It mentioned my university, my major, even speculation about my nationality based on sources close to the production. Someone had definitely leaked this information deliberately. My phone rang. Mrs. Choi. "Maya, I'm so sorry. Someone from the studio leaked the information to generate buzz. We never intended for this to become public before you made your decision." "How bad is it?" I asked, though the rising panic in my chest already suggested the answer. "The entertainment blogs are running with it. The response is mixed." Mixed turned out to be an understatement. I spent the morning reading comments that ranged from curious, "Is this the future of Korean cinema?" to hostile, "Why are foreigners taking roles from Korean actresses?" to bizarrely supportive, "Finally, some diversity in our media." But the worst part was the academic attention. By Monday morning, I had emails from professors asking about my side projects, and classmates who suddenly viewed me as someone seeking celebrity rather than serious diplomatic credentials. Professor Lee found me hiding in the library, scrolling through increasingly inflammatory online discussions about my audacity as a foreign student presuming to represent Korean stories. "Maya, are you all right?" I showed him my laptop screen, where a particularly nasty comment thread debated whether I was obviously unqualified or possibly part of some diversity publicity stunt. "I didn't ask for any of this," I said. "I just did a screen test, and now half the country thinks I'm either an opportunist or a symbol of cultural imperialism." Professor Lee sat beside me, reading over the comments with a thoughtful frown. "What do you think you are?" "Confused, scared, completely out of my depth. But not opportunistic?" "I don't think so. I mean, I never planned this. It just happened." "And the cultural imperialism concerns?" "I'd been thinking about that all morning. I don't want to take opportunities from Korean actresses. But the character they want me to play, she's someone caught between worlds, someone who doesn't quite belong anywhere. Maybe that's something I actually understand. Maybe that's exactly why they want you." My phone buzzed with a text from Jae-wook. "Don't read the comments. People fear what they don't understand. But some barriers need to be broken." That afternoon, Mrs. Choi called with an update that made everything more complicated. "The publicity has been significant. The studio is getting calls from investors, distributors, even international press. Everyone wants to know about the American student who might star in a Korean film. Is that good or bad? For the film? Potentially very good. For you personally? That depends on how you handle pressure." "What kind of pressure?" "The kind that comes from becoming a symbol before you've even decided if you want to be an actress." That evening, I met Sarah at our usual chicken and beer place, hoping for normal conversation with my best friend. Instead, she confronted me with the same concerns I'd been battling all day. "Maya, everyone's talking about you. Not your work, not your talent. You. The American girl who thinks she can just walk into Korean entertainment." "I didn't walk into anything. They approached me." "But you're considering it, aren't you?" Her tone carried disappointment I hadn't expected. "You're actually thinking about abandoning your degree for this?" "I'm thinking about trying something that might be more authentic than anything I've done academically." "Authentic? You've been here 2 years and you still use formal speech with convenience store clerks. What's authentic about pretending to understand Korean stories?" Her words stung, because they echoed my own insecurities. But they also sparked something defensive and surprisingly certain. "Maybe I don't understand Korean stories," I said carefully. "But I understand what it feels like to be caught between identities, to question whether you're living someone else's dream, to feel like you don't quite belong anywhere. If that's the story they want to tell, then maybe I do understand it." Sarah looked at me like she was seeing a stranger. "You're really going to do this, aren't you?" The question hung between us like a challenge, and for the first time since this whole impossible situation began, I felt something approaching clarity. I think I might be. But I had no idea that making this choice would cost me more than I'd ever imagined. I had planned to call my parents Sunday night and explain the situation carefully, diplomatically, with proper context and emotional preparation. Instead, they found out Tuesday morning when my mother's sister sent her a link to an English-language K-pop blog that had picked up the story. The headline read, "Korean Entertainment Breakthrough, African-American Student Cast in Major Film Role." My phone rang at 6 a.m. Seoul time, which meant my parents had been up all night researching, discussing, and probably arguing about their daughter's secret double life. Maya Denise Johnson. My mother's voice carried the particular tone she reserved for major disappointments. "What is this we're seeing online?" "Mom, I can explain. You're supposed to be studying international relations, not gallivanting around movie sets." "It's not gallivanting. It's one role, and I haven't even officially accepted yet." "Haven't accepted yet?" My father's voice joined the call, which meant this was a full family tribunal. "Baby, we didn't send you halfway around the world to play pretend." I closed my eyes, sitting on my tiny apartment floor in pajamas at dawn, trying to explain the unexplainable. "It's not playing pretend, Dad. This is a legitimate film with serious artistic goals." "Artistic goals don't pay back student loans," my mother said sharply. "Artistic goals don't build a stable career. We've invested everything in your education, Maya. Everything." The weight of their sacrifice hit me like it always did. The second jobs, the delayed vacations, the careful budgeting that made my Seoul apartment possible. But for the first time, I felt something else alongside the guilt. Resentment. What if I don't want a diplomatic career anymore? Silence. Long, cold, disappointed silence. "Excuse me?" My father's voice was dangerous now. "What if I've been pursuing someone else's dream this whole time?" "Someone else's dream?" My mother's tone escalated. "Who do you think chose your major? Who do you think applied for that scholarship? You wanted to change the world through diplomacy. You said you wanted to build bridges between cultures. But what if I can do that through storytelling instead?" "Maya, baby." My father's voice softened into the tone he used when he thought I was having a breakdown. "You're confused. You've been studying too hard. You're lonely. And these entertainment people are taking advantage of your vulnerability. They're not taking advantage of me. They believe I have talent." "Talent?" My mother was fully heated now. "You have never acted a day in your life. You were in the church choir and the debate team. You're serious and studious and responsible. You are not an actress. How do you know what I am?" The question came out louder than I intended. "How do you know what I'm capable of, if I've never been allowed to try anything except what you think is appropriate?" Another silence, but this one felt different. Hurt. Allowed? My mother's voice was quiet now, which was somehow worse than when she was yelling. "We didn't allow you to pursue diplomacy, Maya. We supported you. We believed in you. We sacrificed for you. I know that, Mom. I'm grateful. But what if there's another version of me that you never considered supporting?" "There's another version of everyone," my father said tiredly. "But adults choose the version that builds a life, not the version that chases fantasies. This isn't a fantasy. It's a real opportunity with real people who believe in my potential. Your potential is in international relations," my mother said firmly. "Your future is in diplomacy. That's what we've all been working toward for the past 6 years. But what if it's not my future anymore?" The conversation ended with my parents saying they needed time to think, and me staring at my phone feeling like I'd just burned down everything solid in my life for the possibility of something uncertain. An hour later, Sarah knocked on my door with coffee and a concerned expression. "Rough morning?" she asked, noting my tear-streaked face. "My parents think I've lost my mind." "Have you?" I looked at her, my best friend who'd supported me through 2 years of academic struggles and cultural adjustments, and late-night anxiety attacks about whether I belonged anywhere. I don't know, I admitted. But I know that when I was doing those scenes, when I was being that character, I felt more like myself than I have in years. Maya, your parents aren't wrong to be worried. You're talking about throwing away a graduate degree and a career path for something you've never done before. I'm talking about taking a risk on something that feels authentic. But what if it doesn't work out? What if you fail? The question I'd been avoiding hit me straight on. Then I fail. But at least I failed trying something that felt true instead of succeeding at something that feels like performing someone else's life. Sarah stared at me for a long moment. You've really changed, haven't you? Or maybe I'm finally becoming who I actually am instead of who I thought I should be. That afternoon, I called Mrs. Choi and accepted the role. But I had no idea that choosing authenticity over security would cost me more than just my parents' approval. The script that arrived Monday morning was 127 pages of the most emotionally demanding material I'd ever encountered. Between Worlds wasn't just a film, it was surgery, dissecting every anxiety I'd carried about identity, belonging, and the courage to choose an authentic life over a safe one. My character, Jung Min-ji, was a Korean-American adoptee who returns to Seoul to reconnect with her birth culture, only to discover that identity isn't something you can research or plan. It's something you have to live. The parallels to my own experience were so obvious they felt like mirrors pointing at mirrors, reflecting infinitely. Director Kim had scheduled 2 weeks of intensive preparation before filming began. Maya, this character requires complete emotional honesty. You can't hide behind technique because you don't have any. Your only tool is truth. The first table read took place in a conference room filled with Korea's most respected actors. I sat between Jae-wook and veteran actress Kim So-young, my script shaking slightly in my hands as I listened to these professionals bring complex characters to life with effortless skill. When my turn came to read Min-ji's first major monologue, a scene where she confronts her adoptive parents about feeling culturally homeless, my voice cracked on the very first line. "I love you for raising me," I began. But the words caught in my throat because I was thinking about my own parents' disappointment. But I need to understand why I feel like a stranger in my own life. The room was completely silent as I worked through Min-ji's emotional breakdown, channeling my own confusion about choosing between the life I'd planned and the one I was discovering. When I finished, Kim So-young was crying. "That," she said quietly, "is what we've been looking for." But not everyone was supportive. During lunch break, I overheard 2 crew members debating my casting in rapid Korean they assumed I couldn't understand. She has no training whatsoever. How can she carry an entire film? The director knows what he's doing. Sometimes authenticity matters more than technique. Or sometimes foreign faces sell more tickets internationally. Their words stung because they echoed my own insecurities. Was I being cast for my talent or my novelty? Did it matter if the result was authentic storytelling? Jae-wook found me hiding in the bathroom afterward, obviously upset. "You heard them talking, didn't you?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Maya, every actor in this business deals with criticism about why they were cast. Too pretty, not pretty enough. Too commercial, not commercial enough. The only question that matters is, can you do the job? But what if I can't? What if I'm just fooling myself about having any talent? Then we'll know by the end of filming. But giving up before you try means you'll never know what you might have been capable of." The real test came during our first scene together, a pivotal moment where Min-ji meets a Korean musician, Jae-wook's character, who helps her understand that belonging isn't about perfect cultural knowledge, but about emotional connection. Director Kim set up the cameras in a small Hongdae cafe, the same neighborhood where this whole impossible journey had begun. Jae-wook and I sat across from each other, scripts closed, ready to work through the scene intuitively. Action. "You seem lost," his character observed, watching Minji struggle with chopsticks and formal speech patterns. "I am lost," I replied, letting Minji's frustration become my own. I thought coming here would answer questions, but it just created new ones. Like what? Like whether identity is something you're born with or something you choose. Like whether I'm Korean enough to tell Korean stories or American enough to matter to American audiences. The words weren't in the script, but they were absolutely true. Like whether trying to bridge two worlds just means you don't fully belong to either one. "Cut," Director Kim said softly. "Maya, where did that come from?" "I don't know. It just felt like what she would say." "Those weren't your lines." I looked at the script, realizing I'd improvised the entire emotional core of the scene. "Oh, sorry. Should we do it again with the actual dialogue?" "Absolutely not. We're keeping exactly what you just did." That evening, exhausted and emotionally drained, I called my parents for the first time since our fight. My mother answered on the first ring. "Maya, we've been thinking about what you said." "Mom, I'm sorry if I..." "No, baby. We're sorry. We were so focused on the practical concerns that we forgot to ask the most important question, which is, are you happy?" I considered the question honestly. I'm terrified. I'm overwhelmed. I'm completely out of my comfort zone. But yes, I think I'm happy. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm doing something that actually matters. Then maybe, my father's voice joined the call. "We need to trust that we raised a daughter smart enough to know the difference between a good risk and a reckless mistake. You're not disappointed in me? We're proud of you for being brave enough to choose authenticity over security," my mother said, "even if it scares us to death." Hanging up the phone, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. But I had no idea that the real challenges were just beginning. The announcement came on a Tuesday morning through official press releases, industry publications, and social media simultaneously. Between Worlds starring Maya Johnson would begin principal photography next month, with an expected release date in spring. By Tuesday afternoon, her boycott Between Worlds was trending on Korean Twitter. The backlash was swift, organized, and more vicious than anything I'd imagined possible. Online forums filled with detailed arguments about why casting a foreign actress in a Korean film was cultural appropriation, economic irresponsibility, and evidence that the entertainment industry had lost touch with national values. "She doesn't even speak Korean properly," one viral post complained, attaching a video of my university presentation where my pronunciation had been imperfect. "How can she represent our stories? This is what happens when we prioritize international appeal over artistic integrity," another added. "Korean roles for Korean actresses." Mrs. Choi called an emergency meeting at the production office, where I sat surrounded by executives who looked like they were calculating financial losses in real time. "The sentiment isn't universal," she said carefully, "but it's vocal and it's growing. Some cinema chains are already receiving pressure to boycott the film." "How bad is it really?" I asked. Director Kim pulled up social media metrics on his laptop. "Bad enough that our investors are asking questions. Good enough that international distributors are showing increased interest. So I'm either going to make this film a complete failure or an unexpected success." "Probably both," Jae-wook said grimly. "The question is whether we have the courage to continue regardless." I stared around the table at people whose careers and investments were now tied to a decision they'd made about my potential. The weight of their trust felt heavier than any academic pressure I'd ever experienced. "What do you want to do?" Mrs. Choi asked me directly. "I want to make the best film possible and prove that the choice was artistic, not political. And if the boycotts continue, then at least we'll fail trying to tell an authentic story instead of succeeding with a safe one." The real test of everyone's commitment came 3 days later during a press conference to officially announce the casting. The media room was packed with entertainment reporters, industry bloggers, and what looked like a few protesters who'd somehow obtained press credentials. I sat at a long table between director Kim and Jae-wook, wearing my most professional outfit and trying to project confidence I absolutely didn't feel. Cameras flashed as reporters shouted questions in rapid Korean that tested the limits of my language skills. "Maya Si, what makes you qualified to represent Korean characters?" "I don't think I'm qualified to represent all Korean characters," I answered carefully. "But I understand what it feels like to be caught between identities, to question where you belong, and to struggle with choosing authenticity over security. If those experiences help me connect with this specific character, then maybe that's enough. Are you concerned about taking opportunities from Korean actresses? I'm concerned about doing justice to a role that people believed I could handle. My job isn't to represent all foreign actresses or all Korean stories. My job is to serve this particular story with honesty." "Jae-wook Si," another reporter called, "do you stand behind this controversial casting choice?" Jae-wook leaned toward his microphone with an intensity I'd never seen from him in person. "I've worked with dozens of talented actresses. Maya brings something to this role that technical training can't teach. She understands the emotional truth of the character's journey because she's living a similar one herself. That's not controversial. That's good casting." "But surely you're concerned about the fan reaction." "I'm more concerned about making authentic art than avoiding criticism." The questions continued for another 20 minutes, some supportive, others clearly designed to elicit controversy. But the moment that changed everything came from an older reporter in the back row. "Maya Si, there are people saying you're being used as a publicity stunt, that your casting is more about generating international attention than serving the story. How do you respond?" I looked at director Kim, who nodded encouragingly, then at Jae-wook, who gave me the same supportive smile he'd offered that first night outside the cafe. "If this is a publicity stunt," I said slowly, "it's an expensive one that requires me to carry an entire film with no acting experience. If I fail, everyone in this room fails with me. Does that sound like a safe publicity strategy?" A few reporters actually laughed. "But more importantly," I continued, finding my voice, "good stories are about universal human experiences told through specific cultural lenses. This story is about someone discovering that identity isn't something you inherit or research. It's something you actively create through your choices. Whether I'm Korean or American or anything else, that's a journey I think audiences can connect with." The applause was scattered but genuine. Walking out of that press conference, I felt like I'd survived my first real test as a public figure. But Jae-wook's expression was troubled. "What's wrong?" I asked as we reached the parking garage. "Maya, you did great in there. But this is just the beginning. The pressure is going to get much worse before it gets better. Are you having second thoughts about casting me?" "Never. But I'm worried about what this level of scrutiny might do to someone who never asked to be a symbol of anything." He was right to worry, but neither of us could have predicted how personal the attacks were about to become. The article appeared in Entertainment Weekly Korea on a Thursday morning, just as filming was supposed to begin. The headline read, "The Real Maya Johnson, Friends Reveal the Truth Behind Korea's Most Controversial Casting Choice." I was in hair and makeup, getting transformed into Minji for my first day of shooting, when my phone exploded with notifications. Mrs. Choi burst into the trailer looking like someone had died. "Maya, we need to talk. Now." The article was devastating precisely because it was so detailed, so intimate, and so obviously sourced from someone who knew me personally. It chronicled my academic struggles, my insecurities about belonging in Korean culture, my family's financial sacrifices for my education, and most damaging of all, quotes about my desperation for acceptance and willingness to abandon her real goals for temporary fame. The unnamed source was described as a close friend and classmate who requested anonymity to speak freely about Johnson's personality and motivations. But I knew exactly who it was. Only one person knew about my parents' second jobs, my anxiety attacks before presentations, and my private frustrations about never feeling Korean enough or American enough to succeed in either context. Only Sarah knew that I'd once said I'd do anything to feel like I belonged somewhere. "This is bad," Mrs. Choi said gently. "The quotes make you sound opportunistic and unstable, combined with the existing criticism about your qualifications." I scrolled through the article again, seeing my private vulnerabilities weaponized into evidence of my unworthiness. Every insecurity I'd shared with my best friend was now public proof that I was exactly what critics claimed: an unqualified outsider using Korean cinema for personal validation. "Do you want to call her?" Director Kim asked. "Get her side of the story?" "I know her side of the story," I said numbly. "She thinks I'm making a mistake, and she's trying to save me from myself by destroying the opportunity. Or she's trying to save herself from losing a friend to a career she doesn't understand," Jae-wook suggested more gently. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Maya, we need to talk. This isn't what I meant to happen." I stared at the message for a long moment before turning off my phone entirely. "What do you want to do?" Mrs. Choi asked. "We can delay filming, address this publicly, or we film," I said firmly. "If I'm going to fail, I want to fail because I couldn't do the job, not because I got scared of criticism." "Maya, this level of negative attention is exactly what my character would face," I interrupted. "Minji deals with people questioning her authenticity, her motivations, her right to claim Korean identity. Maybe dealing with it personally will help me understand her journey better." Director Kim smiled for the first time all morning. That's either brilliant method acting or complete delusion. Probably both. But when I walked onto set that morning, facing a crew who'd all certainly read the article, I felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with cameras or performance. These people now knew details about my family's financial situation, my academic insecurities, and my deepest fears about cultural belonging. The first scene was a confrontation between Minji and her adoptive mother, who questions whether Minji's search for her Korean identity is really about connection or just rebellion against the family who raised her. "You're looking for something to blame," the mother character argues. "Some reason why you don't feel satisfied with the life we gave you." "I'm not blaming anyone," Minji responds. "I'm trying to understand why I feel like I'm performing someone else's life instead of living my own." As I delivered the lines, I could feel the crew watching me differently than they had during rehearsals. They weren't just evaluating my performance. They were wondering how much of Minji's identity crisis reflected my own opportunistic desperation, as described in the article. "Cut," Director Kim called. "Maya, that was good, but it felt careful. Minji isn't trying to prove she's nobility. She's just trying to be honest about her confusion. Should I try it again?" "Try it like you have nothing left to lose." The second take felt different. Instead of trying to seem professional and worthy of the role, I let Minji's vulnerability mirror my own recent devastation. The betrayal by Sarah had stripped away my last pretense of having this figured out. "I'm not looking for something to blame," I said, and my voice cracked with real pain. "I'm looking for something true. Because everything I thought I knew about myself, about my relationships, about my future, it all feels like lies now." The actress playing my adoptive mother broke character slightly, her eyes widening at the raw emotion I'd just accessed. "Cut," Director Kim said quietly. "That was perfect. Maya, whatever just happened, channel that energy for the rest of the day." During lunch break, I finally turned my phone back onto 17 missed calls from Sarah and a long text that made my heart sink even further. "Maya, I swear I didn't know they would publish those quotes with your name. I thought I was talking to a student journalist about the pressures international students face. I never meant to hurt you. Please call me back. I'm so sorry." But the damage was done. By evening, the article had been picked up by international entertainment blogs, with headlines like, "The controversy behind Korea's groundbreaking casting choice," and "Is Maya Johnson using K-drama for personal gain?" Jae-wook found me in my trailer after we'd wrapped for the day, staring at my phone screen where Sarah's apology texts continued to arrive. "You know," he said, settling beside me, "the best revenge against someone who betrays your trust is succeeding despite their sabotage." What if she was right, though? What if I am just desperately trying to belong somewhere, and this whole thing is elaborate self-deception? Maya, I've watched you work for 6 hours today. You accessed emotions that trained actresses struggle to find after years of study. That's not desperation. That's talent. But what if... No what ifs, he interrupted gently. What if you just focus on doing the job you were hired to do and let everything else sort itself out? That night, I called my parents to warn them about the article before they saw it online. My mother's response surprised me. "Baby, anybody who's known you for 5 minutes knows that article doesn't represent who you are. The people whose opinions matter will see through it. But what if it ruins the film? Then you'll have failed trying to do something brave instead of succeeding at something safe. I think I can live with that." Hanging up the phone, I felt something shift inside me. Sarah's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also clarified something important. I was going to finish this film, not because I needed to prove anything to critics or former friends, but because I discovered something authentic about myself in the process. But I had no idea that the real test of my resolve was still coming. 3 weeks into filming, I thought I'd survived the worst of the controversy. The entertainment blogs had moved on to other scandals. The boycott hashtags had faded from trending topics, and the crew had begun treating me like a colleague rather than a curiosity. Then my parents called with news that shattered what remained of my carefully constructed stability. "Maya, we need to tell you something." My mother's voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. "Your father's been laid off." The words hit me like physical impact. My father had worked at the same engineering firm for 15 years. His job was the foundation that made everything else possible. My sole apartment, my living expenses, the financial security that let me take artistic risks. "How long?" I asked. 2 weeks ago. We didn't want to worry you while you were dealing with everything else." 2 weeks? I stood up from my trailer chair, pacing the small space. "Mom, why didn't you tell me immediately?" "Because we know you, baby girl. We know you'd try to come home and fix everything instead of finishing what you started." My father's voice joined the call. "Maya, I want you to listen carefully. This doesn't change anything about your film. We'll figure out our situation. Dad, it changes everything. I should be there. I should be helping. You should be exactly where you are, doing exactly what you're doing." But the practical implications crashed over me like a wave. Without my father's income, my parents couldn't maintain the financial support that made my soul life possible. My student visa was tied to academic enrollment, but I'd already missed too many classes due to filming. If I returned to focus on my degree, I'd have to quit the film. If I stayed to finish the film, I might lose my visa status, and my parents might lose their house. There has to be a solution, I said desperately. There is, my mother replied quietly. You finish this film, prove that the risk was worth taking, and use whatever success comes from it to build a career that can eventually help all of us. But what if it doesn't work? What if the film fails and I've wasted everyone's time and money? Then at least you failed trying to become who you're supposed to be, instead of staying safe and regretting it forever. I hung up the phone and immediately called Mrs. Choi, explaining the situation through tears I couldn't control. Maya, take the day off. We can adjust the shooting schedule. No, I need to work. I need to do something productive instead of just panicking. But when I arrived on set that morning, everything felt different. The craft services table that had seemed like abundance now felt like waste. The elaborate lighting setups felt frivolous when my parents were calculating grocery budgets. The very act of pursuing artistic fulfillment felt selfish when my family needed practical solutions. The scene we were shooting was one of Minji's most emotional moments. A phone call where she learns that her birth parents had tried to find her years earlier, but been blocked by adoption agency bureaucracy. Her reaction was supposed to be devastation mixed with rage at the systems that had kept her from her identity. Action. I answered the phone as Minji, listening to news that recontextualized her entire understanding of her origin story. What do you mean they tried to contact me? The words came out flat, disconnected. Cut, Director Kim called. Maya, you seem distracted. Is everything all right? I looked around the set. Dozens of crew members being paid hourly rates, expensive equipment running, a production schedule that depended on my ability to access emotions I suddenly couldn't reach. I'm fine. Let me try again. Take 2. But the second attempt was worse. Minji's devastation felt abstract compared to my own very real panic about visas and family finances, and the possibility that pursuing authenticity might have cost everyone I loved their security. Maya, Jae-wook approached gently after the third failed take. What's really happening? I told him everything. My father's job loss, the visa complications, the impossible choice between family responsibility and personal dreams. As I spoke, I could see him calculating the same practical realities I'd been wrestling with all morning. There might be a solution, he said finally, but it would require some creative contract restructuring. What do you mean? If you were officially employed by the production company instead of just cast as an actor, your visa status might have more flexibility, and if the employment included a signing bonus. He was talking about advancing me money against future earnings, essentially betting on the film's success to solve my immediate crisis. It was generous and risky and probably the only option that could keep me in Korea long enough to finish filming. Jae-wook, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. Because this film works because of your performance, and your performance works because you understand what it feels like to risk everything for authenticity. But what if... Maya, you've been asking, what if, since the day we met. What if you finally try what now instead? That afternoon, Mrs. Choi presented me with a revised contract that officially made me a production company employee, with an advance against future earnings. It wasn't enough to solve my parents' long-term financial problems, but it was enough to buy time and keep me legally in Korea through post-production. Calling my parents that evening with the news felt like the first good phone call I'd made in weeks. Baby, you found a way to take care of yourself and help us at the same time, my mother said proudly. That's the diplomatic thinking we always knew you had. Maybe diplomacy and artistry aren't that different, I realized aloud. Both require finding creative solutions to seemingly impossible problems. And both require faith that bridges can be built even when you can't see the other side yet, my father added. But as I hung up the phone, I knew that solving the financial crisis was only the beginning. Now I had to prove that the risk had been worth taking. The pressure was no longer just about making a good film. It was about validating every sacrifice my family had made and every bridge I'd burned to get here. By the time we finished principal photography, Between Worlds had become the most scrutinized film in Korean cinema history. Every leaked behind-the-scenes photo generated think pieces about representation, authenticity, and the future of Korean storytelling. I'd gone from unknown graduate student to reluctant cultural symbol in less than 4 months. The pressure culminated at the Seoul International Film Festival, where we were scheduled to premiere the completed film. Director Kim had entered us in competition, which meant critics, industry professionals, and international distributors would see the final product before public release. "This is it," Mrs. Choi said as we prepared for the screening. "Everything we've worked for comes down to the next 2 hours." I stood in the festival venue bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The same face that had triggered a national conversation about who gets to tell Korean stories, wearing a custom handbook-inspired gown that had been designed specifically for this moment. 6 months ago, I'd been struggling to give academic presentations about cultural soft power. Tonight, I was about to premiere in a film that had become a real-time case study in those same dynamics. The theater was packed. I recognized entertainment reporters, film critics, and industry executives in the audience, along with faces I'd seen commenting negatively about my casting online. The weight of their collective judgment felt heavier than any academic evaluation I'd ever faced. Jae-wook squeezed my hand as the lights dimmed. "Remember, you've already done the hard part. Everything from here is just other people catching up to what we already know." Watching myself on screen was surreal. Minji's journey from cultural confusion to authentic self-acceptance played out in scenes I remembered filming, but the performance felt like it belonged to someone else. Someone braver and more emotionally available than I'd ever believed myself capable of being. The audience was completely silent throughout the screening, which could mean either total engagement or universal rejection. I spent 2 hours analyzing every cough, every shift in posture, every moment of collective attention or distraction. When the credits rolled, the silence stretched for what felt like eternity before applause began. Tentative at first, then building to something that sounded genuinely enthusiastic. The post-screening Q&A was the moment I'd been dreading most. Director Kim and I sat on stage facing an audience full of people who'd been debating my qualifications for months, finally ready to judge the actual work instead of the concept. The first question came from a respected film critic who'd written extensively about Korean cinema's international expansion. "Maya-see, this role required you to portray someone struggling with cultural identity while you yourself were navigating similar challenges in real life. How did you distinguish between personal experience and character development?" "I think that's exactly the point," I answered, finding my voice stronger than I'd expected. Minji's journey isn't about resolving cultural identity once and for all. It's about learning to live authentically within complexity. I couldn't separate my personal experience from the character, because the character's truth comes from lived experience, not theoretical understanding. But critics have argued that casting a non-professional actor undermines the craft of acting itself. I looked at director Kim, who nodded encouragingly. "I think there's a difference between professional training and authentic emotional access," I said carefully. Minji required someone who understood her specific internal conflict, not someone who could perform a generic version of cultural confusion. Maybe sometimes the best casting choice isn't the most technically trained person, but the person who can access the emotional truth the story needs. An older journalist in the middle section raised his hand. Miss Johnson, there's been considerable debate about whether your casting represents genuine diversity or tokenistic international marketing. How do you respond to those concerns? The question I'd been avoiding for months hung in the air like a challenge. I could feel the entire audience leaning forward, waiting to see if I would deflect or engage directly. If this was tokenistic casting, I said slowly, it was a terrible business strategy. Casting an unknown actor with no training in a lead role is expensive and risky. If the goal was international appeal, there were much safer ways to achieve it. I paused, gathering courage for what I really wanted to say. But more importantly, I think authenticity in storytelling means casting people who understand the emotional truth of the characters, regardless of their background or training level. Minji's story is about someone caught between identities, someone who doesn't fit neatly into expected categories. Maybe it makes sense that she would be played by someone who actually lives that experience. Are you saying that identity politics should influence casting decisions? I'm saying that emotional authenticity should influence casting decisions. Minji's Korean heritage is important to her story, but what makes her relatable is her struggle to define herself beyond other people's expectations. That's a universal experience told through a specific cultural lens. A younger critic near the front had the final question. What do you hope audiences take away from this film? I hope they take away the understanding that identity isn't something you inherit or achieve. It's something you actively create through your choices, I said. And that sometimes the most authentic version of yourself is the one that doesn't fit into anyone else's predetermined categories. The applause that followed felt different from the polite acknowledgement after the screening. It felt like recognition. Walking off stage, I felt like I'd finally found the words to explain what this whole impossible journey had been about. Not representation or controversy or career ambition, but the simple human need to tell stories that feel true. But the real validation would come from critics' reviews, box office numbers, and whether audiences connected with Minji's story enough to make all the risks worthwhile. The morning after our festival premiere, I woke up to my phone buzzing with notifications I was afraid to read. Film festival buzz could be positive or devastating, and there was no way to know which direction the critical response had gone until I actually looked at the reviews. But before I could open any entertainment blogs, Jae-wook called with news that made everything else irrelevant. Maya, we need to meet. Something's happened that changes everything. An hour later, I sat in a quiet cafe in Hongdae, not far from where this whole journey had begun, staring at Jae-wook's phone screen in disbelief. The headline read, Min Jae-wook defends controversial casting choice. I would risk my career again for authentic storytelling. The article featured an interview he'd given to Korea's most prominent entertainment magazine, where he'd gone far beyond the usual diplomatic responses expected from idol actors. People are asking whether Maya Johnson deserves this opportunity, he was quoted as saying. But they should be asking whether the Korean entertainment industry deserves to have its boundaries expanded by someone brave enough to take on a role that required complete emotional vulnerability. I looked up at him across the table. Jae-wook, this is career suicide. Idol fans don't forgive actors who contradict their expectations. Then maybe it's time I stopped being just an idol and started being an artist. But your music career, your endorsement deals, your fan base, will have to adapt to supporting someone who makes choices based on artistic integrity rather than market research. He pulled up his social media accounts on his phone, showing me the immediate fan reaction to his public defense. The responses were exactly as divided as I'd feared, some fans expressing pride in his artistic growth, others feeling betrayed by his departure from safe commercial choices. Why? I asked. Why risk everything for a film that might fail anyway? Because 6 months ago, I was sleepwalking through performances, recording songs chosen by committee, building a career that felt like an elaborate costume. Working on this film, watching you discover your authentic voice as an actor, reminded me why I wanted to be an artist in the first place. But you had everything already: fame, success, financial security. I had everything except the feeling that my work mattered. He leaned forward intensely. Maya, you took a risk on something you'd never done before because it felt true. How could I do less? The interview had indeed been explosive. Beyond defending my casting, Jae-wook had criticized the Korean entertainment industry's conservative approach to storytelling, challenged the idol system's emphasis on manufactured perfection over authentic expression, and suggested that international collaboration might be essential for artistic growth. The responses are brutal, I said, scrolling through online comments. Your fan clubs are organizing. Some of them are calling for boycotts. Some of them. Others are saying they're proud to support an artist who stands behind his work. What if this destroys your music career? Then I'll build a different kind of career based on work I actually believe in. My phone rang. Mrs. Choi. Maya, have you seen the international coverage? International coverage? Jae-wook's interview is being picked up by entertainment outlets worldwide. CNN, BBC, Entertainment Weekly. Everyone's covering the story of the K-pop star who risked his career to defend artistic authenticity. Is that good or bad? For the film? Very good. For Jae-wook personally? We'll have to see. That afternoon, we received word that 3 major international distributors wanted to meet about acquiring Between Worlds for global release. The controversy that had seemed like a liability was becoming a marketing asset, but only if the film itself lived up to the attention. No pressure, Director Kim joked during an emergency production meeting. But our lead actor just bet his entire career on this project succeeding. Our lead actor made his own choice, I corrected. He doesn't need my permission to take artistic risks. But he does need your performance to justify those risks. The weight of responsibility felt crushing. It was one thing to fail pursuing my own dream. It was another thing entirely to fail when someone else had sacrificed their established success to support my potential. That evening, Jae-wook and I walked along the Han River, trying to process the day's developments. Are you angry at me? He asked. For what? For making this bigger than it needed to be. You were already dealing with enough pressure. I considered the question honestly. I'm terrified that I'll let you down. But I'm not angry. What you said in that interview about authentic storytelling being worth career risks, that's the most honest thing anyone said about this whole situation. Including you? Especially me. I've been so focused on defending myself against criticism that I forgot to talk about why this story matters. And why does it matter? Because it's about someone learning that belonging isn't about fitting into predetermined categories. It's about having the courage to create your own definition of home. We walked in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city lights reflect off the water. Maya, whatever happens with our careers, I want you to know something, Jae-wook said finally. Meeting you changed me as an artist and as a person. Even if everything falls apart tomorrow, I'll never regret that. Standing there by the river, I realized that this whole impossible journey had been about more than making a film or building a career. It had been about learning to choose authenticity over safety, even when the consequences were unpredictable. But we still had to wait for the most important judgment of all: whether audiences would connect with the story we'd risked everything to tell. If you're hoping we found the courage to bet everything on authenticity, don't miss what happened when the film finally reached theaters. 3 months after our festival premiere, Between Worlds had achieved something no one predicted: commercial success that forced the industry to reconsider everything they thought they knew about Korean cinema's possibilities. The film opened in limited release and expanded nationwide after word of mouth generated the kind of organic buzz that marketing budgets can't manufacture. International distribution deals followed, with streaming platforms bidding for global rights to the movie that had started as a risky casting experiment. But the moment that validated every risk we'd taken came with a phone call from Mrs. Choi that left me speechless. "Maya, sit down. The Blue Dragon Film Awards nomination committee just announced this year's selections. And Best New Actress. You've been nominated for Best New Actress." I actually dropped my phone. The Blue Dragon Awards were Korea's most prestigious film honors, equivalent to the Academy Awards in terms of industry recognition and career impact. Being nominated meant that my performance had been judged worthy by the same critics and professionals who'd initially questioned my qualifications. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. The ceremony is next month. And Maya, you're not just nominated. Industry insiders are saying you're a serious contender to win." Hanging up the phone, I sat in my tiny Seoul apartment that had become home in ways I'd never expected, trying to process the surreal trajectory from unknown graduate student to award nominee in less than a year. My parents called within hours, having heard the news through international entertainment coverage. "Baby, we are so proud of you," my mother said, crying in the way she only did during moments of overwhelming joy. "You took the biggest risk of your life, and it paid off in ways none of us could have imagined." "Mom, I haven't won anything yet." "You've already won everything that matters. You found your authentic voice and used it to tell a story that moved people. The rest is just recognition." The month leading up to the award ceremony was a whirlwind of interviews, photo shoots, and industry events where I was introduced as the breakout star of Korean cinema. Each appearance felt like performing a role I was still learning: public figure, artistic representative, symbol of changing industry standards. The most meaningful moment came during a roundtable discussion with other nominees, where veteran actress Kim So-young addressed me directly. "Maya, when your casting was announced, I'll admit I had doubts. Not about your potential, but about whether the industry was ready for the conversation your presence would generate. And now? Now I think the industry needed that conversation more than we realized. Your performance didn't just serve the story, it expanded our understanding of what Korean stories can be." The awards ceremony itself was held at the Grand Intercontinental Seoul, with red carpet coverage broadcast internationally. I wore a custom gown that honored both Korean design traditions and contemporary international fashion, a visual representation of the cultural bridge building that had become my unexpected specialty. Walking the red carpet, I thought about how different this moment felt from my academic presentations just a year earlier. Then, I'd been performing confidence I didn't feel about theories I didn't quite believe. Tonight, I was genuinely confident about work I knew had been authentic. Jae-wook, nominated for Best Supporting Actor, met me at the entrance to the ceremony hall. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm about to find out whether this whole year was a beautiful dream or sustainable reality. Either way, you changed the conversation about who gets to tell stories in this industry. That's not dependent on any award." The ceremony itself was a blur of performances, speeches, and mounting tension as categories were announced. When they reached Best New Actress, my heart was beating so hard I was sure the sound technicians could pick it up. "And the winner is..." The presenter paused with the calculated drama award shows require. "Maya Johnson, Between Worlds." The theater erupted in applause that felt like validation of every risk I'd taken and every critic I'd proved wrong. Walking to the stage, I thought about the journey from that rainy night outside a Hongdae cafe to this moment of industry recognition. At the podium, holding the award that represented more than artistic achievement, it represented acceptance, authenticity, and the possibility of belonging in a place I'd chosen rather than inherited. I looked out at an audience that included everyone who'd supported and challenged me throughout this impossible year. 6 months ago, a lot of people questioned whether I belonged on Korean screens. I began, speaking in Korean that had improved dramatically through daily use on set. Tonight, I want to thank everyone who believed that belonging isn't about where you come from, but about the truth you bring to the stories you tell. I paused, gathering courage for what I really wanted to say. This award isn't just mine. It belongs to every artist who's ever taken a risk on authenticity over safety. Every storyteller who's expanded definitions of who gets to represent what. And every person who's learned that home is something you create, rather than something you inherit. The standing ovation that followed felt like recognition, not just of my performance, but of the principle that artistic truth matters more than traditional expectations. But even more meaningful than industry validation was the text I received from Sarah later that night. Maya, I'm so proud of you. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand what you were really doing. You didn't just become an actress. You became exactly who you were supposed to be. Sometimes the most important awards are the ones that acknowledge not what you've achieved, but who you've become in the process of achieving it. The success of Between Worlds and the recognition from the Blue Dragon Awards opened doors I'd never imagined walking through. International offers arrived weekly, Hollywood productions seeking the Korean cinema breakthrough star, European art films wanting to explore cultural identity themes, and Korean projects eager to capitalize on my unexpected marketability. But the most significant change in my life had nothing to do with career opportunities, and everything to do with the person who'd been beside me through every step of this impossible journey. Jae-wook and I had grown closer during filming, but the intensity of production and public scrutiny had made it impossible to explore what was developing between us beyond professional collaboration and mutual support. Now, with the immediate pressure resolved and our artistic partnership validated, we finally had space to acknowledge what had been building for months. It started with a quiet dinner celebration the week after the awards ceremony. We'd been to countless industry events together, but this was the first time we sat across from each other without scripts, cameras, or career concerns mediating our conversation. "So," he said, smiling in the way that had first caught my attention outside that Hongdae cafe. "What happens now that Maya Johnson, award-winning actress, can write her own ticket in the entertainment industry?" Honestly, I have no idea. 6 months ago, my biggest career decision was choosing a dissertation topic. Now I'm supposed to have opinions about international distribution deals and franchise potential. What do you want to happen? I want to keep making work that feels authentic, instead of just commercially viable. I want to tell stories that matter to people who feel caught between identities or expected roles. I paused, realizing I was avoiding the personal dimension of his question. And I want to figure out what this thing between us actually is when we're not under constant public scrutiny. His expression grew more serious. "Maya, I need you to know something. Everything I've felt for you over these months, it started before you became successful. It started that first night, when you fell outside the cafe and looked up with such genuine surprise and vulnerability. That person, not the award winner, not the symbol of industry change, that person is who I care about. Even if that person still trips over trash cans and struggles with chopsticks. Especially that person." Our relationship developed gradually, carefully, with the awareness that both of our careers now existed in a public sphere that would scrutinize and comment on every development. Korean entertainment media had strict expectations about idol dating, and my own public profile meant that any romantic connection would become part of the larger narrative about my place in Korean culture. But what grew between us felt too genuine to sacrifice for public relations concerns. The first time Jae-wook kissed me was after a late-night script reading for my second film, a project we'd chosen specifically because it allowed us to work together again while exploring more complex themes about identity and artistic integrity. We were in his apartment, having spent hours discussing character motivations and scene interpretations, when he looked at me with the same intensity he'd brought to our very first scene together. "Maya, I need to tell you something that's been true since the day we met." "What?" "You changed my understanding of what it means to be authentic as an artist and as a person. Before I met you, I was performing a version of myself that I thought the industry wanted. Watching you refuse to compromise who you are for anyone else's comfort taught me that real artistry requires real courage. Jae-wook, I'm not finished. I care about you not because you're talented or successful or represent some ideal of authentic creativity. I care about you because you're brave enough to be exactly who you are, even when it's inconvenient for everyone else." When he kissed me, it felt like the most natural conclusion to a conversation we'd been having in subtext for months. Dating in the public eye required strategies I'd never needed as an unknown graduate student. We learned to navigate paparazzi, manage social media speculation, and handle the particular pressures that come with being a cross-cultural celebrity couple in Korea's entertainment industry. The response from fans was predictably mixed. Some of Jae-wook's supporters embraced our relationship as evidence of his artistic growth and international perspective. Others felt betrayed by his choice to date someone outside traditional expectations for idol romantic partners. My own growing fan base seemed more universally supportive, perhaps because my public identity had been built around challenging conventional expectations from the beginning. But the most meaningful validation came from my parents during their first visit to Seoul since my career change. "Maya, we can see how happy you are," my mother said, watching Jae-wook and me cook dinner together in my upgraded apartment. "Not just successful, happy. There's a lightness in you that we never saw during your academic years." "You approve?" "We approve of you choosing someone who sees exactly who you are and loves that person rather than who you might become or represent," my father said. "That's rarer than artistic success." Jae-wook, who'd been nervously preparing for this parental evaluation for weeks, visibly relaxed. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, I want you to know that your daughter changed my life by teaching me that authenticity is more valuable than perfection. I'll spend the rest of our relationship trying to deserve someone that brave." 6 months later, when Jae-wook proposed during a quiet moment on the set of our third film together, it felt like the most natural evolution of a partnership that had always been about supporting each other's authentic artistic expression. "Maya Johnson," he said, kneeling in the same production studio where I'd done my first screen test, "will you marry someone who promises to always encourage your most truthful creative choices, even when they terrify him?" "Yes," I said, crying and laughing simultaneously. "But only if you promise to keep taking artistic risks that scare the industry executives." "Deal." Our engagement announcement generated international headlines about the cross-cultural love story that had emerged from Korea's most controversial casting choice. But more important than media attention was the understanding that we'd found someone who valued authenticity over safety, artistic growth over commercial predictability, and love over convention. Sometimes the best relationships are built not on shared backgrounds, but on shared commitment to becoming the most honest versions of yourselves. 2 years after Between Worlds premiered, I stood in the conference room of my own production company, looking at project proposals that would have been unimaginable when I was an unknown graduate student struggling with international relations presentations. Maya Johnson Productions specialized in what the industry had started calling authentic cross-cultural storytelling, films that explored identity, belonging, and the complexity of modern global citizenship through personal, character-driven narratives. Our second film, Finding Soul, had just been accepted into the Cannes Film Festival, and we were developing 3 more projects that continued pushing boundaries about who gets to tell what stories in Korean cinema. Maya, the response to the Cannes selection has been incredible. Mrs. Choi, now my business partner and head of development, said as she spread trade publication headlines across the conference table. Variety called you the breakthrough artist who redefined Korean cinema's international potential. The Hollywood Reporter said, "You've proven that authenticity transcends cultural boundaries." I studied the headlines with the same surreal feeling I'd experienced throughout this entire journey. It's weird seeing my name associated with concepts like redefining anything. I still feel like I'm making it up as I go along. That's exactly what makes you effective, Director Kim said from across the table. You approach each project like it's a question to be explored rather than a formula to be executed. Our latest project was perhaps the most ambitious yet. A film about a Korean-American family navigating generational differences about assimilation, success, and cultural preservation. The script had attracted interest from actors across Asia and America, with funding coming from both Korean studios and international streaming platforms. This is what the industry looks like now, Mrs. Choi explained. Cross-cultural collaboration isn't experimental anymore. It's essential for reaching global audiences who want to see their own complexity reflected in the stories they consume. But success hadn't eliminated the challenges that came with being a symbol of industry change. Each project still generated debates about representation, authenticity, and the politics of cross-cultural storytelling. I'd learned to navigate criticism while staying focused on the work itself. The most significant development had been the emergence of other international actors in Korean productions, performers from various backgrounds who were being cast based on their ability to serve specific stories rather than represent entire cultural categories. You know what's funny? Jae-wook said during one of our evening planning sessions. The industry is starting to treat international casting as normal business practice rather than revolutionary social statement. Is that good or bad? It's progress. When something stops being controversial, it usually means it's becoming institutionalized. My phone rang with a call from Professor Lee, who'd been following my career trajectory with the pride of a mentor whose student had far exceeded academic expectations. Maya, I have a proposition for you. Yonsei University wants to offer you a position as a visiting lecturer in international relations, specifically focusing on cultural diplomacy through artistic collaboration. Professor Lee, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure I'm qualified to teach. You're more qualified than anyone else I know. You've demonstrated cultural diplomacy in action rather than just theory. Your films have done more to expand Korean soft power internationally than most traditional diplomatic initiatives. But I never finished my degree. You created something more valuable than a degree. You created a new model for cultural bridge building that other artists and diplomats are now studying. The idea of returning to academic life in a completely different capacity was appealing, but it would require balancing teaching responsibilities with production commitments. Could I do it part-time? Maybe 1 semester per year? We'd be honored to have you in any capacity you're available. That evening, I discussed the opportunity with Jae-wook over dinner at our favorite quiet restaurant in Hongdae, not far from the cafe where this whole impossible journey had begun. It feels like coming full circle, I said, using everything I've learned about authentic storytelling to teach the next generation of international relations students. What would you teach them? That cultural understanding isn't something you achieve through research. It's something you develop through genuine engagement and emotional honesty. That the most effective diplomacy happens when people tell their truth instead of performing what they think others want to hear. Sounds like you figured out how to merge your original career goals with what you actually became. Maybe they were never as different as I thought. Maybe authentic storytelling and effective diplomacy both require the same skills. The ability to build bridges between different perspectives through honest communication. 3 months later, I stood in a Yonsei University classroom facing 25 international relations students who looked remarkably similar to the person I'd been 3 years earlier. Serious, ambitious, and slightly intimidated by the complexity of cross-cultural understanding. How many of you chose international relations because you want to change the world? I asked. Every hand in the room went up. Good. Now, how many of you have experienced creating something that actually moved people from different cultural backgrounds to see each other differently? Only 2 hands remained raised. That's where we'll start. Real cultural diplomacy isn't about understanding policy frameworks. It's about developing the capacity to tell stories that help people recognize their shared humanity across different experiences. Teaching felt like the natural evolution of everything I'd learned about the intersection between personal authenticity and cultural bridge building. Students responded enthusiastically to the idea that artistic expression could be a form of diplomatic action, that creative collaboration could generate cultural understanding in ways that traditional diplomatic channels often couldn't achieve. But the most meaningful validation came during a conversation with one student after class. A young Korean-American woman who was struggling with questions about cultural identity that sounded remarkably familiar. Professor Johnson, I don't feel Korean enough for Korean audiences or American enough for American opportunities. How do you navigate that kind of cultural in-between space? You stop trying to fit into predetermined categories, I said, remembering my own journey from academic performance to authentic expression. And you start creating work that reflects the truth of your actual experience, rather than what you think others expect from someone with your background. But what if people don't understand? Then you help them understand. That's what storytelling is for. Standing in that classroom, I realized that my path from diplomatic theory to cinematic practice had led me back to the same goal: building bridges between different worlds through authentic communication. The difference was that now I knew authenticity couldn't be researched or planned. It could only be lived, shared, and offered as a gift to audiences brave enough to recognize their own complexity reflected in someone else's truth. 5 years after that rainy night outside the Hongdae Cafe, I stood on the stage of the Seoul Arts Center, the same venue where this story began with my first award ceremony, holding my second Blue Dragon Award for Best Actress, and preparing to give what I knew would be my most important speech. The journey from unknown graduate student to established filmmaker had been documented extensively by media outlets fascinated by the American who redefined Korean cinema. But tonight I wanted to talk about something more personal. What I'd learned about the difference between living someone else's dream and discovering your own. 5 years ago, I began, looking out at an audience that included many of the same critics who'd initially questioned my qualifications. I stood on this stage accepting an award I'd never imagined winning, for work I'd never planned to do, in an industry I'd never considered entering. The audience was completely silent, attentive in the way that suggests people are expecting to hear something significant. Tonight, I want to talk about what I've learned about dreams, specifically about the difference between pursuing dreams you think you should have and discovering dreams that actually belong to you. I paused, thinking about the graduate student I'd been, diligently pursuing diplomatic credentials while feeling increasingly disconnected from the work itself. For most of my academic life, I believed that responsible people choose practical dreams. Dreams that make sense to parents, that lead to stable careers, that demonstrates serious commitment to making the world better through established channels. A few people in the audience nodded, clearly recognizing their own career decision-making processes. But what I discovered is that the most practical thing you can do is pursue work that engages your authentic capabilities, even if that work doesn't fit traditional definitions of success or responsibility. I looked toward my parents in the front row. They'd moved to Seoul 6 months earlier, after my father found engineering work with a firm that valued his cross-cultural communication skills. My parents invested everything in supporting what they thought was my dream of becoming a diplomat. What they were actually supporting, without realizing it, was my dream of building bridges between different cultures. They just couldn't have predicted that I'd build those bridges through storytelling rather than policy analysis. My father smiled and nodded, and I could see my mother wiping away tears. The question isn't whether your dreams make sense to other people. The question is whether your dreams engage the best and most authentic version of who you're capable of becoming. I spotted Jae-wook in the audience, wearing the expression of concentrated support he'd offered throughout every step of this journey. When I met my husband, he was successfully pursuing someone else's definition of artistic success, performing songs chosen by committee, maintaining an image designed by marketing research, building a career that looked perfect from the outside while feeling hollow from the inside. Jae-wook had taken enormous risks to support authentic artistry over commercial safety, and his music career had ultimately benefited from the courage to make more personal creative choices. Together, we learned that the most sustainable success comes from work that feels meaningful to the people creating it, not work that meets other people's expectations about what success should look like. I held up the award, feeling its weight as both recognition and responsibility. This award represents more than individual achievement. It represents the possibility that industries can change, that audiences are ready for more complex stories, and that authenticity can be commercially viable when it's pursued with genuine artistic integrity. The applause was building, but I had one more point to make. But most importantly, this award represents the idea that you don't have to choose between honoring where you come from and becoming who you're meant to be. You can build bridges between your heritage and your aspirations, between your family's dreams and your own discoveries, between the person you were raised to be and the person you're still becoming. I paused for the final thought I'd been building toward throughout the entire speech. The question isn't who defines our dreams. The question is whether we have the courage to pursue dreams that define us. The standing ovation felt like recognition not just of my artistic work, but of the principle that authentic choice, no matter how unconventional, can lead to meaningful contribution. Walking off stage, I was approached by a young Korean-American actress who'd been cast in her first lead role after being inspired by the path I'd helped establish. Maya C., thank you for proving that people like us could exist in this industry. People like us? People who don't fit easily into predetermined categories. People who have to create their own definitions of belonging. I smiled, thinking about how many times I'd felt exactly that way throughout this journey. The secret, I said, is that eventually everyone has to create their own definition of belonging. Some of us just get forced to figure it out earlier than others. That night, Jae-wook and I walked along the Han River, the same route we'd taken during the most uncertain period of this entire adventure. Seoul sparkled around us like a city that had become home through choice rather than circumstance. "Any regrets?" he asked, a question that had become a recurring theme as we'd navigated the unexpected trajectory of our shared life. About leaving graduate school? About risking financial security? About becoming a public figure when I'd planned to work behind diplomatic scenes? About any of it. I considered the question honestly, thinking about the graduate student I'd been and the filmmaker I'd become. about the diplomatic career I'd abandoned and the cultural bridge building I'd discovered through artistic collaboration. I regret the pain I caused my parents by changing directions without warning them. I regret losing Sarah's friendship for a while because I couldn't explain what I was discovering about myself. I regret the anxiety and uncertainty and public criticism that came with pursuing something I'd never done before. But I don't regret choosing authenticity over safety. I don't regret learning that my real capabilities were different from what I'd assumed. And I definitely don't regret meeting someone who encouraged me to become the most honest version of myself rather than the most convenient version. We walked in comfortable silence, and I reflected on how different my life had become from anything I could have planned or predicted. Sometimes the most important decision you make is the decision to trust that your authentic interests might lead somewhere more meaningful than your practical plans. Sometimes the biggest risk is the risk that leads you home to yourself. 5 years later, I'm still learning what it means to build a life around work that feels true, rather than work that looks appropriate. But I know now that dreams worth pursuing are dreams that grow you into who you're supposed to become, not dreams that keep you safely inside who you already are. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to pursue authenticity over security, you discover that the most practical thing you can do is become exactly who you are. Epilogue. 10 years after I fell outside that Hongdae cafe, I'm sitting in my production company office, reading a script written by a young Nigerian-Korean writer who wants to tell a story about cultural identity that doesn't fit any traditional categories. The phone rings with my assistant's voice. "Maya, there's a graduate student here who says she has a meeting with you about mentoring opportunities." I smile, remembering my own nervous energy during graduate school, when every professional interaction felt like a test I might fail. Send her in. The young woman who enters my office looks exactly like I did 10 years ago, serious, ambitious, carrying a briefcase that suggests she has her entire future planned out rationally. "Professor Johnson, thank you for meeting with me. I'm studying international relations at Yonsei, and I'm interested in cultural diplomacy through artistic collaboration." "What kind of artistic collaboration?" "I want to develop programs that bring together artists from different countries to create work that builds cultural understanding. But I'm not sure how to bridge the gap between academic theory and practical implementation." I look at her eager, nervous expression and recognize someone standing at the same crossroads I'd faced, the choice between theoretical safety and authentic risk. "Have you ever created any art yourself?" "Oh no. I'm not artistic. I'm focused on the policy and organizational aspects." "What if I told you that the most effective cultural diplomacy happens when you understand the creative process from the inside out?" I don't follow. "What if your next assignment was to make something? A film, a play, a collaborative performance, instead of writing about other people making something?" She looks terrified, which is exactly how I know she should try it. But I don't have any training in artistic production. Neither did I when I started. But I had something more valuable. I had questions that could only be answered through experience rather than research. I stand up, walking to the window that overlooks the same neighborhood where my own journey toward authenticity began. The most important thing I learned is that you can't build bridges between cultures by studying blueprints. You build bridges by being willing to stand in the middle of the space between two sides and figure out how to create connection. Are you suggesting I change my academic focus? I'm suggesting you expand it. The best cultural diplomats aren't the ones who understand policy frameworks. They're the ones who understand how to help people recognize their shared humanity across different experiences. She's taking notes frantically, and I can see her trying to fit my advice into her existing academic categories. But specifically, what should I do next? Write a story. Any story that explores a question you actually care about. Then figure out how to tell that story in a way that helps someone from a different background understand something new about their own experience. And that's cultural diplomacy. That's the foundation of all meaningful cultural diplomacy, the ability to communicate authentically across difference. As she leaves, looking both excited and overwhelmed, I think about how different my advice is from what I would have expected to hear during my own graduate studies. But that's the thing about authentic paths. They can't be planned or researched. Through the courage to trust that your genuine interests might lead somewhere more meaningful than your safe assumptions. My phone buzzes with a text from Jay Wook. "Dinner tonight? I want to hear about the script you're reading." "Yes," I text back. "And I want to tell you about a conversation I just had with a graduate student who reminds me of someone I used to be." Looking out my office window at the Seoul skyline, I think about the journey from that rainy night when I tripped over a trash can and accidentally discovered my real life. 10 years later, I'm still learning that the most important dreams are the ones you never plan to pursue, and the most meaningful success comes from work that helps you become who you were actually meant to be. Sometimes falling down is the only way to find out where you're supposed to land. And sometimes the best thing you can do for the world is become courageously, authentically yourself, even when you have no idea where that path might lead. The briefcase I carried as a diplomatic student sits in my office closet now, not as a symbol of abandoned dreams, but as a reminder that the most important journey is the one that takes you from performing someone else's life to living your own. Today, another young woman walked into my office carrying the same briefcase energy I once had, ready to plan her way to cultural understanding through academic frameworks and theoretical analysis. Tomorrow, if she's brave enough to take my advice, she might discover what I learned, that the most powerful form of cultural diplomacy is simply telling your truth so clearly that others recognize their own humanity reflected in your story. That's how bridges are built, not through policy papers or diplomatic protocols, but through the courage to share who you really are and trust that authenticity creates connection across any difference. And that's how dreams come true. Not by pursuing what makes sense, but by pursuing what makes you come alive.